Chapter 10 Westward Expansion. How Americans Settled the Frontier. Multiple perspectives in the idea of a frontier. When the English colonists first settled in North America, they believed they were entering a wilderness inhabited by Native Americans who were not truly civilized. The English colonists called the outer edge of where they, the white settlers, were living, the frontier. Few white settlers lived in the frontier. The perspective of the Native Americans was the opposite of the settlers' perspective. We've talked about the different Native American cultures in North America that had developed over the span of 30,000 years. Native Americans did not think they were in the wilderness, and they did not see themselves as living on the outer edge of anything. The boundary between where Native Americans were living and where white people had settled would not be called a frontier if history were written from the perspective of Native Americans. This chapter describes the westward expansion of the culture and government of the European colonists across North America. From their perspective, the boundary between the two cultures is the frontier. We must remember the multiple perspectives regarding the word frontier when we use it. Beginning with the very first English colonies on the East Coast, there was always a frontier. When studying U.S. history, it is important to realize the area considered to be the frontier kept moving steadily westward. As white colonists moved into a frontier region, that area was no longer considered the frontier. The frontier became the area a little farther west where Native Americans still lived. Expansion means getting larger. Westward expansion was the movement of white settlers westward onto land being used by Native Americans. How westward expansion began. Westward expansion began before our nation became the United States. In the Proclamation of 1763, the British promised to keep white settlers out of Native American lands in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, but settlers came over the mountains to the new western frontier from all three regions of the colonies. The British made an effort to keep their promise. When the British found settlers on the Native American lands, they burned the settlers' cabins and forced them to move. The British were unable to keep settlers from moving into this area, though, because there were too many colonists and not enough British soldiers. During the early years of our country's history, millions of people came to the United States. Many of them moved west, which continually pushed the frontier further west. The first part of this chapter will explain how and why those millions of immigrants moved west and how local self-government developed in the new lands. From the time of the earliest colonies were established, the political boundaries of the United States expanded. Political boundaries are the dividing lines between two countries. The political boundaries of the United States first expanded beyond the original 13 colonies in 1783 as a result of the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War. In the Treaty of Paris, Britain agreed that the new United States could control all the land from the Atlantic Ocean west to the Mississippi River, except for Florida to the south and Canada to the north. The land added to the United States by the Treaty of Paris is shown here in this map. The added land included the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys that settlers were already moving into. This area was the most western part of the United States from 1783 until 1803. That's a 20-year span. From 1783 until 1803, the northern part of the lands added by the Treaty of Paris were called the Northwest Territory. A territory was a part of the United States that had not yet become a state. The Northwest Territory included what are now the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Today, the United States extends much farther west, and the term Northwest refers to the area near the Pacific Ocean that contains the states of Oregon and Washington. In 1803, the political boundaries of the United States expanded due to the Louisiana Purchase. You read earlier how President Jefferson offered to buy the port city of New Orleans, but instead the French sold all of the Louisiana Territory to the United States. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States. This map shows how the Louisiana Purchase expanded the political boundaries hundreds of miles west of the Mississippi River. Except for the Lewis and Clark expedition, much of the new western land was explored. It was the new frontier, was unexplored. It was the new frontier. People from New England and other European countries steadily moved westward to explore and settle those lands. The area considered to be the frontier gradually moved westward. Millions of immigrants entered the U.S. and moved to the frontier. The Louisiana Purchase made the United States so large that even with the millions of immigrants, it took until the 1840s before the frontier reached the Great Plains. The political boundaries moved well ahead of the movement of people until the 1840s. The second part of this chapter will explain what led people to move even farther west in the 1840s, out beyond the Louisiana Purchase. This chapter will conclude by explaining how the United States government was able to expand the political borders in the 1840s from the western edge of the Louisiana Purchase all the way to the Pacific Ocean.